Good morning. My name is Karen Andres, and I'm the Director of Policy and Market Solutions, as well as the Project Director of the Retirement Savings Initiative at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. And welcome to our discussion this morning. Thanks so much to our friends at Fintech South for hosting this terrific conference, and also for really sort of uplifting the important issues and opportunities around older Americans and how we can use tech to support their financial lives as they age. At the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program, our mission is to make financial security for all a top national priority. And in particular, in the retirement savings world, that means that we're striving to support the work of leaders who are working to build a really inclusive and secure retirement savings system. And we've been working in that field for 15 years because the crisis ahead of us has really been visible for decades. The average American is drastically underprepared for retirement. Half of households over 55 have no retirement savings. And that's in large part because about 40 million Americans lack access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. But it's not just retirement savings that defines the financial lives of older Americans. And we, in recent years, have developed, I think, a much richer understanding of exactly what's going on, and that the financial lives of older Americans are not just defined by Social Security and retirement savings, right? It's about debt, it's about increasing debt loads, it's about a lack of emergency savings, and the totality of these financial challenges really require a totality of tools. That was all before COVID. Now that we're in COVID, I think these issues become even more urgent and important. Recent data shows that 3 in 10 Americans say they have tapped into retirement savings during COVID-19. And most of these folks who have taken money out say they have spent the money on groceries. So this is not a story of people necessarily taking money out to buy that boat. Interestingly, Social Security we have accelerated its insolvency date for the trust fund. Prior to COVID, the insolvency date projected by our friends at the Bipartisan Policy Center was 2035. So that was the year in which we would anticipate seeing cuts in Social Security payments, absent any federal action. But now that date has gotten closer with the reduction in payroll taxes. So that's another dynamic during COVID. And there's a lot of evidence that unpaid bills are stacking up. Debt levels are rising for everybody, and that includes older Americans. So all that paints what may feel like a bleak picture. On the other hand, I think that points to both the need and the opportunity. So I think we need innovative thinking from government and the private sector to ensure people can be financially secure during the years after work. And today we have some innovators here who have taken on that really significant and important challenge to build tech-enabled financial tools in a really deeply underserved market niche. So with that, against that backdrop, I want to introduce our panelists, Rhian Horgan, the CEO of Silvur, and Blair Baldwin, who's the head of the Boston studio of Haven Life and the founder of AgeUp. So I want to sort of get the conversation going by asking a direct question to each of you. So Rhian, can you tell us about Silvur's mission and your product, and what is the problem that it's meant to solve for people that the market hasn't already solved? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks so much, Karen, and thanks again to the team at Fintech South. So the app Silvur is dedicated to helping baby boomers navigate the series of intertwined decisions they make in their 50s and 60s as they prepare for their next act in life. These are consumers that are navigating a web of health and wealth decisions that ultimately also impact the quality of their life and how they spend this next 20-year period plus of life. What we're really focused on at Silvur is really helping the consumer understand actually how interconnected these decisions are, understanding that health decisions and the enrollments that you make in Medicare actually is a big financial decision, so that you really understand, as you're setting up that financial wellness foundation, that you're navigating and making these decisions in a way that really kind of goes to the core of giving you that financial stability. That financial stability is really brought to the forefront in the app through our retirement score, which tells every single customer how long their money will last in retirement. And given that this is really the first generation that's retiring en masse without a pension, there is this extraordinary fear of running out of money. And so I think empowering the customer with a very simple number, think about this as the credit score for boomers. So the retirement score, is that way to give them that North Star to help them really understand the decisions they're making, both, in their everyday purchases, but also in their big decisions about Social Security and Medicare. How does that impact the North Star of their retirement score?
Yeah, and as I told Rhian in the prep call, I did download the app, and now I'm terrified to take it and see what it says. Stay tuned.
Don't worry, we'll give you lots of good recommendations if the starting number isn't in a good spot.
Good, awesome, thanks. Blair, my question for you, can you make the case about why people need to spend more time thinking about longevity risk? Also, what is longevity risk? And why term life insurance is an inspiration for your current product, AgeUp?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karen, and thank you again for moderating and Fintech South for hosting this great discussion. So let's start with a definition: longevity risk. So longevity risk is the risk that you will outlive your resources, and this, in addition to all sort of the topics that sort of Rhian just sort of mentioned about sort of savings rates, retirement, just general state of Social Security. There's another sort of element here, which is people are actually living longer. So due to changes in lifestyle, people are sort of exercising more. Generally, they're eating better. They're smoking less. Medicines are getting better. Folks are actually living like a lot longer than they were in the past, and they're typically not financially prepared for it. And so the statistics on this are actually kind of shocking. It blew my mind as I started researching this. If you take a 65-year-old woman of sort of excellent health who's a non-smoker, there's a 12% chance that she'll live to age 100, which is just unbelievable. That same woman, if she's of average health, it goes down to 8%, but we're still talking about a very reasonable chance that you're going to live to 100. Men fare slightly worse, but again, like if you're a non-smoking healthy man, there's a good chance that you're going to at least make it into your 90s, if not 100 and beyond. So that's the sort of the nature of longevity risk. And I'll just point out that not only statistically are these the chances that you'll actually live to a certain age, but when we went out and we surveyed literally thousands of people on their own expectations about longevity and mortality, they pretty closely match what the actuaries and the Social Security Administration, how they sort of forecast. So universally, there's acknowledgement that there is this longevity risk issue, but there's never really been a financial product to solve it. And so to connect this to the second point, Karen, that you raised, which is term life insurance, a little over 2 years ago, MassMutual, sort of one of the largest, most respected life insurance carriers, purchased a little startup that I founded called Quilt, a little sort of InsureTech, and we merged into their Haven Life subsidiary. Haven Life is MassMutual's sort of in-house startup that creates and sort of digitally markets really interesting sort of term life and other products online. And so MassMutual gave us this, and Haven Life gave this really open sort of ended challenge to do something interesting in annuities, to reinvent the category, try something that nobody's ever done before, and create a product that's financially accessible to almost everybody. And one of the things that really caught our attention when we sort of thought about the nature of annuities and the nature of sort of life insurance is that you have a whole industry built around, say, like the concept of dying too early. Term life insurance is a really good example of this. It's a very inexpensive financial product because a lot of people sort of put money into a pot, and then unfortunately the few families that actually go and use that, there's then sort of a large pot to sort of get distributed. And so it's a low cost way to mitigate the risk of dying too soon. The inspiration for AgeUp was this concept of how come there isn't a mirror product on the other end of sort of the bell curve of mortality. So there's a product for people dying too early, but what about the other end, which is people living longer than they've planned for? And that's really the origin of AgeUp. And it works a lot like term life insurance in that people put small amounts of money into a big pot, and really it's the folks that are lucky enough to make it into their mid-90s or 100 that then get to sort of divvy up that pot. And so it's a good way to get essentially a lot of leverage on your dollars in a very sort of risk protected type of way.
So thanks, Blair. I want to ask, before we get into sort of a discussion, I want to ask what, I'm guessing something you guys may have addressed in your pitch presentations as you were launching your respective ventures. So you guys are both part of a field, sometimes called SilverTech, sometimes called MatureTech, Elder Tech, lots of techs, right? And I know from my years working in retirement savings, there's always this question when you talk about designing tools that are tech enabled that deal with the financial lives of older Americans. Do older people use tech? Are they online? Why are you building an app? Do they use apps? Tell me how you think about the intersection of tech and your customer base throughout their life cycle.
So what we get, so at Silvur, what we get really excited about is this white space, because most people, and I would say kind of entrepreneurs, investors, look at this marketplace and they just assume this customer is not out in the digital world. The reality is my customer base today is 100% boomers. The average age is 58 years old. We have a customer base that's almost equally split men and women. And we acquired 100% of them online. They are online. They were online pre-COVID and they're really online post-COVID. But for example, they're on Facebook, they're not on TikTok, right? So there's differences on like if you were building a product for a 15-year-old versus a 25-year-old versus a 55-year-old around like where you go to find them. That's like step one. I think about that as like very much like top of the funnel. Like, can I find these customers? Is it all about direct mail or can I acquire them digitally? And I think the answer is there's lots of different ways you can acquire this customer. But more importantly is once you've brought them into your ecosystem, have you actually designed an interface that actually engages and resonates with them? And what we saw from day one was that this customer navigates the internet or an app very differently than a millennial. And so from the earliest days at Silvur, we've had designers on our team whose expertise is really making sure that we understand literally how a baby boomer navigates an app. And I will just tell you that it's completely different. Like I have a 6 and an 8-year-old kid. The way they interact with technology is different than the way I interact with technology, and how I interact with technology is different than someone who's 60. And so if you come from that place of understanding that everyone understands how to use different types of technology, but their navigation patterns are different, there's a really amazing opportunity, I think, to build really empowering technology for this consumer. What I want Silvur to be is like the Apple Watch for this generation. All too often, people are building the Life Alert. And Life Alert just visually is this product that makes you feel old, that makes you feel like you're declining and you're kind of embarrassed. Whereas the good news is that the Apple Watch, like I have one, my dad who's 70, like it has features in the app that are really applicable to his health and wellness. But he doesn't feel old by wearing it. And I think as kind of an early entrepreneur in this space, one of the things that we've really focused on is how do we build like beautiful, inspiring technology that's about living and empowering you, not about making you feel old and that you're in decline.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For us, especially with our brand and our UX, it intentionally is sort of positive, inspirational, and aspirational as can be. All the design choices were sort of built around exactly what sort of Rhian was saying. I would add two points to this. One is I do think that kind of trust markers are maybe a little bit more important for this generation. So any type of credibility that you can bring and sort of present in a digital way is really important, because they are bombarded with a lot of offers. There's a lot of noise, and so you do have to sort of demonstrate that you're a trusted company that they can work with. The other sort of nuance that I'd say has to do with the customer journey. Because we're talking about financial products, which are kind of like serious, weighty products. These are like big decisions. They're often not made in a single web session. And it's much more of a journey, sort of exposing a baby boomer to a new financial idea, taking them through that process. They will probably visit the site at least 5, maybe 10 times before they make a purchase. And there's a sort of a lot of communication and sort of presentation of content to sort of move them through the journey. This is probably specific to financial products, but I think it's a good point to make. I don't know, Rhian, if you've had a sort of a similar experience.
Yeah, I would actually echo that comment, which is we see this consumer being on a research journey.
Yes.
One of the reasons we actually chose an app as an ecosystem was that we felt that that an app actually has that ability to allow a customer to be on a more engaged journey with you over a longer period of time, and to create an ecosystem that allows them to come back to it. So we have a very significant part of our experience is content. And it's not because we're trying to become a media company. It's because we understand that the way this consumer often makes decisions is by doing research and reading content. And so we realized really early on that we needed to have a pretty significant content strategy as part of this journey in supporting our customers.
There's also one other interesting thing that I think maybe dialed up a little bit with sort of the older demographic, is the access to some type of live support, even if it's not used. So just having things like 1-800 numbers, like some type of like live chat type of function. Most customers won't use it, but they like the security of knowing it's there. And that's maybe different from, products and user experiences that skew much younger, where they don't want to talk to anybody. In fact, talking to somebody is like the worst thing you could ever do. So
it sounds like what I'm hearing is these are things that you've learned along the way. Like, you didn't necessarily know these things when you launched your solution. What else have you learned that has maybe surprised you? And how would you use that to advise other entrepreneurs or innovators thinking about this market segment, or the people investing in companies like yours?
So what I would say for our customer base, what we've seen is that they're much more financially savvy than we initially expected. And I would describe financially savvy this is not a persona we call Business Bob, who's on like Schwab's website, trading stocks, has his own view on inflation. This is a consumer, though, who is 55 or 60 years old and has been buying financial products for 30 to 40 years. They've bought good products and they've bought bad products. So to Blair's trust radar is up. They know someone, or they themselves have had a bad experience with some financial product during their lifetime. But because they've had this life experience, it does go into this, they take these decisions seriously and they want to be really informed. And so, I think the financial literacy is higher than I would have expected, but in a different way, like in a life experience rather than I'm trading stocks on Schwab's website. And I think that just kind of goes back again to this research, which is this person is willing to commit time to these decisions. So this is, and Blair, I'd be interested to see what you've seen here, but we've actually found that consumers, when we've had a short flow, have not trusted it. So we actually, our onboarding flow, we've been adding to our onboarding flow, which is kind of contrary to everything you learn in technology, which is keep your onboarding flow as tight as possible. This customer, we have found, does not trust fancy algorithms. And so they need to have put enough information in to trust the output. And so we have actually gone the opposite way over the last couple of months, which is adding more and more to our flow, precisely to help us gain trust with the customer in that retirement score output that we're delivering at the end.
Yeah, I've got to build off of what Rhian just said. It's so interesting. When we first launched the original first version of AgeUp, it was literally a very slick one-page calculator where all the inputs were nicely laid out, spat out a nice number. Nobody clicked next at all. And that's to Rhian's point, is that, and this sort of speaks to what we learned along the way, we really had to walk people through how the product worked beyond just the numbers. There is a sort of a narrative, there's a lot more education. And so when we actually relaunched that same UX, we took the inputs on that original kind of calculator quote page, if you will, and sort of split them out. So there's almost an educational page on each one of those inputs that sort of built up to the end result. And that was the key to actually getting people through the funnel. So it's a great point that actually less is not always more. In fact, more is more oftentimes in dealing with this market.
That's so fascinating. Speaking of how you engage with your customers, let's turn to the pandemic, which is currently defining the world in which we live. What do you see or know about how COVID-19 is impacting your customers? And how is it impacting the way that they engage with you and your solutions?
So I think on our side, what we see is if there was any debate about this customer embracing technology, that certainly has gone away dramatically during COVID. And We see it. I mean, I even think of my own personal experiences. I remember teaching my father, who's 70, how to use Zoom in the early days of the pandemic. And I taught him because my son and him wanted to play chess together, and they wanted to have they want to be able to talk and kind of, give each other a hard time as they were playing chess. But a week later, I find out that my dad is now on his French class on Zoom, and then he's going to church on Zoom, and then he's having a cocktail party with friends on Zoom. And so it took me introducing Zoom for my father to first get into that ecosystem. But once he experienced it, he quickly adapted it to the rest of his life. And so I think what we have seen through COVID is that there's been this rapid acceleration of embracing technology and understanding how you can use it. The second thing that we've seen is that a lot of our customers have found that as they've embraced new technology, it's come at the same time as when they were cutting back spending. And many consumers that we speak to are saying, look, I actually think that I'm going to continue spending at a lower level because I am finding ways to live my life in ways that are a little bit less expensive. So it might be, I now have a Netflix subscription. I'm not going to spend $20 at the movies each time I go. Or, I got an ESPN Plus subscription and for, $6.99 a month, I still want to go to live football games, but maybe I won't go to as many. And so one of the things that we've seen from our customer base is customers saying, I actually, not only am I enjoying the engagement and the community that comes out of digital, but I'm also finding ways that digital memberships, digital products are allowing me to actually cut back on my spending. And when we think about, a customer who's 55, cutting back your spending by $250 a month, that for our average customer can add 2 years onto their retirement score. So these numbers start to be real. And when the customers see that actually this is something I was doing in COVID and I can continue to live with, that looks interesting. The one change they're telling us they're not willing to live without, frankly, is travel. So they all want to get back out and travel, and virtual travel isn't going to cut it for them. They want to get back out there. But I would say a lot of entertainment, we're seeing that actually, I think, is going to have some significant ripple down effects longer term into how they budget and how they spend.
Thanks.
For us, if you roll back the clock to sort of January, February, we were getting ready to really sort of publicly launch AgeUp as oriented towards boomers sort of buying this longevity protection for themselves. We did a lot of market research. We were about to do a big PR push, and then COVID came, and this created just a lot of angst for myself and the team, because suddenly we had this longevity product that's all about living a very, very long life, but everywhere you looked, the world was all about mortality and sort of the tragedy of this awful disease. And so we had to actually sort of put the brakes on everything, reassess, and we were fortunate because in that sort of pre-COVID time, we had sort of designed and launched about a 1,500 person survey to baby boomers about expectations around longevity, their retirement savings, how long their money would last, all sorts of issues relating who would sort of step in and take care of them in their 90s or older, whether it's the government or family. So what we ended up doing is taking that survey and then relaunching it right at the peak of COVID to see what changed and if there really was an opportunity to have a discussion about longevity in this really difficult time. And I'd say that the results actually surprised all of us in that, well, almost everybody self-reported that COVID was having either a moderate or a severe impact on their daily lives. Their perceptions about the world in 30 years, so when they're in their 90s or approaching 100, was almost unchanged. And it was a fascinating finding, but it kind of makes sense because even during times of COVID, people are still saving into their retirement funds. They're still thinking about long-term issues. And so that's actually what gave us confidence to start getting out into the market, start playing with different sort of messaging, being very sensitive to, again, because this is a tricky time, but start introducing this longevity risk concept into the market I would say in a very sort of kind of empathetic, sort of sensitive way. So that's really how it impacted us. And surprisingly, people are responding really well to it, especially this aspirational aspect of what the world looks like in 30 years.
Well, in some ways that squares, Blair, with some data that we have been kind of tracking. The Federal Reserve has published data actually before COVID about the way that people often respond after a pandemic specifically which is savings rates go up. They sort of recognize, and this is like, global data, that they recognize that, wow, whatever steps I can take to prepare myself, I want to take. And I sort of wonder if there is a corollary there to what you're saying. So it's really interesting the way that sort of counterintuitive reactions, can surprise us. I do want to pause because I think we want to bring in a third panelist who was slated to join us, but I think was delayed. So welcome, Ramsey Smith.
Hello.
Hi there, welcome. You're the CEO of ALEX.fyi, ALEX.fyi, sorry.
Yes, thank you.
And I'd love to go ahead and throw you an intro question so you can join the dialogue. So,
sure.
I'd love for you to tell us, like, what prompted you to leave your long and successful career in Wall Street? Not many people do that, to build ALEX.fyi, and tell us why annuities need to be like dusted off and brought
Sure.
back into the conversation here.
So first of all, thank you very much for bringing me in here midstream. So I apologize for that. Didn't mean to be disruptive. So at Goldman, my prior firm, no names, too late, but at my prior firm, I built a number of businesses. One of them was focusing on providing risk management tools for large insurance companies. And at a certain point, we realized that the products the insurance companies were selling were creating a lot of risk, and there was an opportunity to create products that were still good for the end consumers, but created less balance sheet risk for the carriers. So as we got into that business, it was very successful. But one of the things that I started to ask myself is, are we solving the right problem here? And we were in the business of helping to create, interesting features for annuities, for guaranteed income solutions. But ultimately, my determination was maybe the bigger opportunity was to focus on simpler solutions for a broader audience. And that just was simply a very different mission than one would have at a typical large Wall Street firm. So my determination was that the bigger issue is that there's this enormous gap in sources of guaranteed income for retirees that's been left behind by the limited availability of Social Security. It's a fantastic resource and benefit, but it only covers so much of your need. And then the growing vacuum from traditional defined benefit pension plans. There's a very, very important vacuum that needs to be filled. And the only real source you can go to are life insurance companies, and annuities are unfortunately poorly understood. And so that's what I saw as the biggest opportunity.
Terrific. Actually, it dovetails nicely with what Blair was talking about on sort of longevity risk, and people, beginning to have this sort of conversation about, like, we're living longer than we thought, or there's a decent risk that we'll live a lot longer than we thought. I want to turn to public policy, actually. So we will find ourselves with an administration in 2021 that may or may not be new, and either way, we will have a new Congress. I'm curious, from where you sit, both in the tech ecosystem and as people who deeply understand the needs of Americans who are really struggling in different ways to prepare for retirement. If you had the ear of our president and leaders in Congress, what would you say to them about what needs to happen to support the financial security of Americans as they age? What actions would you have them take? And Ramsey, maybe if you wouldn't mind, I'll go to you first.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So I think one of the most important things is to save Social Security. So in my view, it doesn't really, we're at the point where it's so ingrained in both in American culture and frankly in most people's financial plans, whether deliberately or not, that even if it is unrealistic and there were excessive promises, I think it's very important that we make sure that those promises are kept, and that any kind of reform that is made to benefits down the road is done sort of further on, and also is well communicated along the way. So save Social Security is a very important, for me, if I could wish for one thing, that would be it. And then beyond that, I think we need to make sure that the government's mission is to make sure that people get everything they're entitled to. So right now you need to go to outside resources to figure out, how do I get the most out of my Social Security benefit? Like, it's your money The government should actually make it as easy for you as possible to figure out how much money you're entitled to and how to get it. And then lastly, I'd like to see the Secure Act really, the potential of the Secure Act really be borne out. And I would like to see more efforts legislatively to make guaranteed income an important part of our culture going forward.
I have to double click on that. What, beyond what they've done in the Secure Act, do you have any sort of specific thoughts?
So I think first and foremost with Secure Act, it's just getting it implemented. So I think we've got the right legislation, and I think it's going to take a couple of years for corporate America to catch up with the infrastructure they need to put in place to make it work. And then even once you've done that, there's going to be a fair bit of time for consumers to realize sort of what the potential is. So we talked about it when we were setting up for this discussion. We talked about this idea of opt-in versus opt-out. I think that any kind of safe harbor for opt-out strategies, I think, is in the best interest of individuals and of the country. You should default into some sort of process where you're investing, you're allocating to a guaranteed source of income in the future. If you don't want to, you should be able to opt out. But I think that's the best approach.
Great, Rhian. Your score is sort of the shows the net result of a lot of different factors in someone's life, right? One's ability to prepare or save for retirement is a function of a lot of different things, some of which are the structure of our economy, some of which is public policy, some is private market innovation, competition, et cetera. So I guess I'm wondering, from where you sit, looking at the totality of really someone's financial life, what's the policy opportunity that you would whisper into, let's say, a next administration's ear or Congress?
Yeah, so I would second everything that Ramsey has said, but maybe I'll just give another idea to bring to the table, which is around really broadening the narrative around healthcare away from just monthly premiums and expanding it to the total cost of healthcare. A lot of good data out there that talks about the cost of healthcare over the course of retirement. The average American couple spending over $280,000. When I see that, but then I hear the narrative from CMS last week announcing, the lowest prescription drug plans in 3 years, and the drop is $1. I worry that we're getting a little caught on optics and not actually educating the consumer about the total cost of healthcare. We recently ran a study with Katie Couric looking at the cost of healthcare. We specifically looked at Medicare Advantage, and we compared and contrasted a healthy American with an individual that had a chronic illness. In this particular case, it was pancreatic cancer. And what we saw was that the individual that had pancreatic cancer, the cost of their healthcare reduced their score by 5 years. So whether it's a 5-year drop in your retirement score or thinking about that absolute dollar of $280,000, which, by the way, doesn't factor in a nursing home, what you realize very quickly is that healthcare is one of the biggest costs that consumers face in retirement. So we already have a retirement crisis. You add the cost of healthcare on top of it, and then the consumer not really being educated in a way to truly understand the total cost. What they're being incented to choose oftentimes are low cost plans, which frankly often lead them to be underinsured. And that, I think, is really problematic when you think about actually creating that financial security for this customer over time. So for me, it would be about changing the narrative away from monthly premiums to total cost. Because until the consumer understands the total cost, they're unable to actually effectively plan for that cost in retirement.
It's so critical. Blair, your thoughts on the policy question?
I mean, I have to second Social Security by far, like sort of the most, my number one, without doubt. The one thing I would maybe add is, and this is especially relevant for the sort of the boomer demographic, is doing a better job of supporting caregivers. And so if you think about boomers as a generation, their parents are now in their 80s and 90s and require a lot of care. And oftentimes that's not compensated in a market type of way. So figuring out how we can actually better support caregivers, I think, is really important from policy standpoint.
So Blair, maybe I'll just jump in there because I was actually just looking at this the other day. I was personally really excited to see that in the Biden platform, for the first time, you actually see a presidential candidate talking really, in detail about supporting caregivers. But I would just say it doesn't go far enough. So I think, if I recall correctly, it's a $5,000 tax credit. The reality is that, in particular, women in their 50s who leave the workforce to take care of their parents end up giving up over, on average, $300,000 worth of retirement savings / income. And it's both they're quitting their jobs early or moving part-time, and they're also not getting Social Security credits. So, I applaud the potential Biden administration about bringing this to the forefront, but frankly, $5,000 is only the tip of the iceberg. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. But when this is costing families $300,000, we really again have to think about how are we actually creating the support networks both financially and emotionally for these individuals.
Not to mention the cost of child-dependent care throughout one's working years that significantly detracts from your ability to save in the first place, right? So I think what I'm hearing is this there's a whole set of policy changes across a worker life cycle that would ultimately impact one's ability to live a financially secure retirement. Yeah, Ramsey, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing very quickly, and it really dovetails with precisely what Rhian and Blair are saying. Is one of my aha moments as I went along this journey is realizing that one, the overall importance of financial planning, and two, that the financial planning industry, I think, spends a lot more time talking about asset allocation and investment, and rather really focusing on budgeting and costs. And that needs to be fixed. That's not really a policy issue. I think that's an industry issue, but that's exactly what everybody on this panel is focusing on. And I would like to see the industry sort of refocus in that direction.
So in our remaining 4 minutes, I want to ask one more question. And I think this is particularly important for Fintech South, which would, Fintechs in the South, or those that are based in the South, would be particularly keyed into the issues of racial equity. And we know that Black and Brown people in America struggle disproportionately to be financially secure in retirement. Do you think that this category of ElderTech, Fintech, SilverTech, MatureTech, do you think it has a role to play? Or what role do you think it has to play in producing more racially equitable outcomes for communities of color? You'd like to take that on?
Well, hopefully we all get a moment. So I'll be very quick. I think that the default strategies with opt-out offered by employers, I think, are an important start. I think financial education is great. I think that everybody of any background needs to really focus on sort of habits and behavior. So I would say that those should be the focus issues. And if we get those right, people will start to save more, and people will do what they need to do to get set up for retirement. But that's another big aha: is education is great, but behavior is a far more important issue for all of us to rectify.
Yeah, and for me, I'm a product guy at heart, and AgeUp is a product that solves longevity risk, but it actually doesn't address, Karen, the really important topic that you raised around sort of equity, which is why I'm so excited to work on another product that actually really does address that more spot on, which is a short-term disability insurance product. So unfortunately, 2/3 of Americans actually don't have short-term disability coverage. That definitely affects some populations more than others. And if we can do a better job preventing people from slipping through the cracks and staying sort of financially solvent, it will actually go a long way towards helping retirement issues in the long term.
So maybe I would just wrap up with a note on government benefits, which is one of my early inspirations for building our holding company, Kinder, and the app Silvur. Was a trip to Barnes & Noble where I bought a 350-page book on Social Security. And I think if there was ever an aha moment in my career, it was looking at this book and realizing that it was really designed for the 1% of the 1% who are going to actually buy the book to start with and then spend the time to read this mind-numbing set of calculations. And what I realized was that the average consumer was not set up for success. And so when I think about supporting, all Americans, in particular Black and Brown families, it's really about making access to government benefits and the navigation easier to understand, so that we're actually giving people a chance to be set up for success. Now, government benefits navigation is on the later stage of retirement planning, but the reality is if you have not been able to save, those benefits are even more important, and really making sure that we're not forcing someone to have a college education, a PhD, to speak English as a first language, and to live in a wealthy neighborhood to be able to actually navigate these benefits. That, I think, is for me a place where, as we think about technology, as an opportunity to really level the playing field around how we help and support customers make better decisions around these benefits.
Thanks so much. And I know we're at time, so I just want to thank all of you for joining us today, and also for the innovation that you're doing out there on behalf of these customers. I hope it inspires those in the audience to take a second or third look at this niche and begin to do innovation of their own. So thank you so much to FinTech South, and thanks for joining us today.